guys, it's Dr. Minardi here, bringing you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we are joined by a truly great friend of mine, Kayla. And so I would like to introduce her to the stage. Hey, Kayla, how's it going?
Hello, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you as well. So, Kayla has had a tremendous background. So, Kayla Bassett is the head of product at Ensis, a company developing AI-powered proposal software for responding to governmental RFPs, RFIs, and more. Prior to Ensis, she was a director of product management by way of their acquisition of Limbix. At Big Health, she directed the modernization of the key platform services and tooling supporting apps for insomnia, anxiety, and depression. And at Limbix, Kayla was the director of product management and led a team of product managers building digital therapeutics for adolescent depression and anxiety. Previously, she built data products to accelerate clinical research at Truveta, and that's where I met her. She also improved COVID response with machine learning at Data Robot and tackled scam advertisements at Facebook. Prior to her career in tech, Kayla was a Marine Corps intelligence officer and served in a variety of posts around the world. She co-founded a nonprofit dedicated to improving mental health among veterans through peer support. She received her BE from Vanderbilt University in biomedical engineering and her MS from Carnegie Mellon University in information technology. Kayla is also married with 2 kids, and in her spare time, she could be found cycling, trying new donuts in coffee shops in Portland, Oregon, and engendering in her kids a love of the outdoors through hiking and skiing, and there is nothing better than that. So, Kayla, again, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you are taking your time to be with us today. You have had such a wonderful career so far. I'm excited to see, obviously, the future, but there's only so much that you can glean from a bio. So tell us a little bit more about yourself as a person.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like surreal to hear that read back actually, because there's a lot of twists and turns in that bio, especially hearing you talk about like my time in military service and then the kind of pivot into tech. That part always feels interesting to talk about because they feel like such different experiences to me, but then they also feel like strangely similar. A lot of what I did in the military, like it conveys every day. So I think that's the part like that doesn't always come out of the bio. I think there's like people hear that I was in the military for as long as I was. I was in for 10 years and it feels like such a different experience. But then I don't know, the title of this is Where Does Your Journey Stem From? And a lot of it stems from those 10 years and the day-to-day experience of like working through adversity and through change and through being flexible and having to learn to kind of pivot on a dime. A lot of that is transferable. And I think that doesn't always come out of the bio, but I think that a lot of the lessons learned in that time in service actually is what I lean on more than almost anything else that I do. So I think that that's the part that, I try to lean on the most whenever maybe some of the other experiences don't always come through. So.
No, I totally appreciate that. And I want to touch on that a little bit later. But tell us a little bit more about, I think, your academic journey. How did you get into BE or BME, some people refer to, and then obviously transition over to IT? I think that's it's an interesting transition, I personally.
Yeah, my undergrad being in biomedical engineering, I was like math was always my favorite subject in school, and my mom is a nurse still. She still like does bedside care as a nurse, and she's in her mid-60s, which I know she's going to love me saying on this podcast to for other people to hear. But she's in her mid-60s. She still does bedside care, and she like I remember being a kid in grade school and doing this like project with her where we like made a model of the heart and we like would pump blood through this like model that we made together with like tubes and valves and stuff like that she'd gotten from the hospital with like supplies that she took home for me to be able to make this. And I always like just had this fascination with the human body, but I also really loved math. So in my like 16, 17-year-old brain, the best way to combine these two things that I loved, which is like math and human anatomy, was obviously to major in biomedical engineering. That was like my sort of naive 16, 17-year-old mind. And so I did. I didn't have any clue as to like what fields would be available to a biomedical engineer, but I knew that I liked to learn about those two things. So that's what I decided to study in school. That was like my way of combining two things that I love very much. When I started my undergrad, I already knew that out the other side, I was going to be joining the military. That's what funded my college education. So there was like not going to be an opportunity for me to put that into practice very much immediately upon graduating, but it's what I really love to learn about. So it's like what I wanted to study in school. While I wasn't a biomedical engineer immediately upon graduating, I did go, and practice a very like technical field in the military, which I'll get into in a second. But like I think that like the systems thinking and having like an engineering mindset, even though I wasn't a biomedical engineer after graduating, was extremely helpful. Like you don't have to be exactly the thing you studied in undergrad to like, come out the other side actually using the skill. And that's, that wasn't obvious to me obviously at the time, but like, yeah, it's just what I love to learn. And that's why I went and studied it. The master's that I ended up getting, this was several years later that I went out and got my master's, but that was because of the military as well. So this was, I think 6 years later or something like that. I think I'd been in the military at this point, 5 or 6 years. And I was fortunate enough to get to serve at Fort Meade, which is like a very like IT intensive duty station. It's in Fort Meade, Maryland. And I kind of fell in love with computers and how they talk to each other, computers, phones, like digital devices and how they communicate with one another. And I had the opportunity to go on and study that while I was in the area. And so that's how I got to go on and get my master's. That also was paid for by Uncle Sam. I was really lucky to get to do that. So I don't know. I was very lucky. I always got to learn about the things that I really was passionate about. In some cases, I put them into practice while I was working. And then in other cases, I just really had a passion for learning about them. And I found other ways to transfer the skills, but I was just a really lucky person. So,
No, I love what you said around going to school because that's what you loved, but then actually harnessing those skills and attributes that are then translatable. I think that's one of our mission pieces that stem from is to understand that maybe not what you're actually getting your degree in doesn't necessarily have to be your career pursuits. I mean, hell, I think I'm the quintessential sort of example of that. I have a PhD in analytical chemistry. I don't do analytical chemistry on a daily
yeah.
basis, nor do I ever plan on doing it in the future. I just don't. But there's a lot of transferable skills around analyzing data, looking at a problem set, applying hypotheses, doing results driven analysis. Like all of that was embedded within me during my academic career, but it's something that I utilize now more than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that like there, like I took like a couple of coding classes, for example, in undergrad, and like the languages that we learned then aren't even the ones that like people would laugh at, some of the stuff that we were, but like the systems thinking and like the logical thinking that you apply, it's all transferable. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if what we were learning was probably antiquated now, but like the fact that we like learned kind of an approach and a way to problem solving, like you said, like it's 1000% transferable, and it makes you like that much more malleable and adaptable and able to pick up new things like in a really like you learn to learn basically in some cases. And I think that's paid off tenfold. So yeah, for sure. I agree.
I'm really curious around your, I think, comparators around BME and IT,
Mm,
because as I think about it, it's very, BME is going to be very physics oriented, and anatomical structures oriented. But even biochemistry to some extent. Whereas when I think of IT, I think of like binaries, zeros and ones. And maybe that's an incorrect thing. That's
yeah.
again me thinking about it, but it's interesting the amalgamation of both of those because I could see, especially in the health tech space, them being very useful and synergistic.
Yeah, I did learn something about myself somewhere in the course of like the 4 years of BME, and that's that I was much better at some parts of it than others. I wasn't actually that good at the well, I was terrible at chemistry, by the way, so you got that on me. But I wasn't that good at the like at the pharmacological parts. At the like, I was okay at the biology parts of it, or the like maybe physiology and stuff, But the where I like excel greatly was anything that really leaned on my math strengths, or leaned on my physics strengths, or on instrumentation, or electrical engineering, or comp sci. So I actually steered quite a bit away from yeah, so, like, as far as, like, comparators go, I actually probably, like, leaned a whole lot into, like, what would now be regarded as, like, I mean, it would have been regarded this at the time as well, but, like, into med devices, or into instrumentation, or into things that, like, really probably, look and smell more similar to IT. It's obviously not IT, but they're really similar in nature in terms of, like, I mean, I was leaning into instrumentation quite a bit, for example, at the time. The like every at Vandy, every undergrad research student had to do, or every undergrad student had to do like a final research project, for example. And so like mine was 1000% like an instrumentation project. I didn't do anything that was, chemistry related or anything like that. So I really steered away from some of the stuff that was like um not necessarily I steered away from like the chemistry or anything, because I learned very quickly that actually, well, those weren't the subjects that I was very good at. I thought I was really good at biology, and I was actually terrible at some of the more advanced levels of biology and chemistry, as I learned. So, which is probably why I excelled at like at IT and at network, like kind of the more like advanced like computer networking, coursework and stuff like that that I did at Carnegie Mellon and stuff. So I don't know. Computers talking to one another really made a lot of sense to me, as it would turn out, but some of the other stuff, not so much. But
That's funny because I hated chemistry in high school. And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, it all makes sense. So it's interesting that sort of like that switch. And I don't know if it's age, if it's as you grow up that you would mature into that sort of understanding. Um, but I think I can appreciate, however, your answer around, no, I went to what I was good at and or what I enjoyed the
yeah,
most.
yeah, you take all those like, you take all the foundational stuff, and there's just stuff that was very obviously not for me. And there was stuff that like I clearly really got. And then, once you grow out of the foundational stuff, you have an opportunity to like really lean into the stuff that you understand. And that felt so joyful to me, like to be able to lean into the stuff that I really, really understood and just could like naturally ace. Like what a wonderful space to be in, especially once you as a STEM major, you have to see that you're going to take courses with pre-med students. As you get it, like if you were majoring in chemistry, like there's like coursework that you're going to take with people who are like absolutely trying to make straight A's, which I was a BME student who was like not a pre-med student, so that was not my bag. Once I got out of those like hyper competitive and foundational courses and just got to live in this space of just pure joy and doing the stuff that I just really enjoyed learning because I was like naturally good at it, that was like amazing for me. I really, really loved it then. But
No, those are great words of wisdom. I want to talk a little bit about then, you have your academic career and then you've transitioned over to the military. So obviously talk to us. You're our first guest that has any sort of academic or professional experience in the military. So and I'm sure most of our guests or audience members are really interested in that.
I'll tell you about the military. I don't even know if I knew knew what to expect. It came with the scholarship that I went to school on was an ROTC scholarship. So basically they paid for undergrad, and then I owed back 4 years to pay back for my tuition, which the school that I went to was not a cheap school to go to. So I was really thankful to have that paid for. Um, I don't know if I fully appreciated like what the military would be. You get plenty of training and things like that before you actually start your contract, but it's hard to appreciate what that experience will be. I did 4 years, and then to be frank, I was actually enjoying my time in. I was getting like diverse experiences. I was learning new things. I was working with people who were really mission oriented, and they were also extremely dedicated, and they were very intelligent. So I did 4 years and I kept going. Like I went all the way to 10 years before I kind of decided that it was time to do something else. Um, I I really enjoyed it, honestly. I was an intelligence officer. which can mean a lot of different things. I think if you meet one intelligence officer, one service member in general, but one intelligence officer, you've met one. But I served in first in Okinawa, Japan, and then that was kind of my launch point to a couple of other posts throughout the Pacific region. And then came back to the States and served at Fort Meade for a few years, and then went from Fort Meade to California, and then from California had deployed to Iraq, and that was kind of my last deployment. And that was where I said I was kind of ready to do other things, and I started a family from there. That I think like it can be really fast paced. You are, subject to ever changing environments, and you get the opportunity. Like, I think what surprised me the most is you get the opportunity to work with people who like are just masters of their craft. In a lot of cases, I was in the Marine Corps, so it's the smallest of all of the active duty services, and I mean, people are just like, they're second to none, to be perfectly honest with you. It's definitely not without its hardship. There's definitely times when I was like grumbling and working late, and but there's something about like this like bond through privation also that seems to work really well, and people kind of like grumble through it together. And I don't think I've experienced anything quite like that since I was in. So yeah, I don't know, like it's hard to describe. I don't think I'd go back and do it again. I've had my 10 years and I had my fun. But there's something that was really special about that experience. It's kind of hard to replicate. And you do learn so much, both like intangible things and also like very tangible things. Like I was doing data analytics. I was doing, like I said, I went and got my master's and learned some like very hard skills that have been extremely transferable. But you also learn how to like roll with a lot of change and be very adaptable and problem solve in ways that are like pretty tried and true. So I don't know. I could go on all day probably about that time in, but it was pretty special to me.
No, that's great, and that's great to hear too. I guess was there a point at which you then said, "I want to go and get other experiences in industry," or was it a particular moment? Like, tell us a little bit about that decision making.
Yeah. So I had it was multifold. I had just gotten back from, so I did, so my, almost my whole time in was focused on counterterrorism, which I think for many people, especially in the Marine Corps, where they spend the bulk of their time. You'd be hard pressed to find people who weren't focused on that from 2009 to 2019, which is when I was in. But I focused on counterterrorism. I had just finished a deployment to Iraq and was focused on the counter ISIS campaign in Iraq. This was toward the end of the Obama administration, and like the Battle of Mosul, which was a pretty significant campaign up north in Iraq. So that felt like I'd focused almost exclusively on ISIS and that hotbed of a conflict toward the end of my time in service. And then going to Iraq and kind of experiencing that really felt like a pretty good punctuation point. It felt like you would be hard pressed, in my opinion, to find almost anything in like the space of counterterrorism that felt more pressing to work on. And so having had that experience and feeling like I'd kind of done the thing that I set out, like that was it for me. I was like, okay, I've done the thing, right? Like I've been in this entire time. I've been working on counterterrorism almost this entire time. And then I've gone and done this work that really did feel like sort of the height of doing CT work if you're going to be doing it. So there was that part for sure. Like, kind of done it. How much more of this am I really going to seek out? And I think the other part of it that I was reaching a rank as well where it was like I was transitioning away from like really doing the hands-on work into like more staff related roles that didn't seem as interesting to me anymore. So that was one part of it. And then I think the probably the biggest part, that's as I'm looking on my desk at like pictures of my kids, was I was expecting my first kid. And so I was slated to go on another deployment soon after I'd gotten back from Iraq. And then I was expecting my first child. And then that just completely flipped around my perspective around like how I viewed deployments and things like that. People deploy all the time with children. Women and men deploy all the time with children, and they make it work. And I celebrate that for them. And that's totally fine and wonderful. I had a really hard time thinking about what months of my kids' lives I would want to miss in favor of a deployment. For plenty of families, they figure that out and that works for them, and that's completely fine. For me, it was really hard for me to think about what 6 to 8 months I'd want to set aside and be absent for. And I started to feel myself do this game where I was like, okay, well, like I could avoid a deployment by going to this tour, and then maybe I could do this, and then I could skip a deployment going to that place. And then I realized like, okay, I'm actively trying to avoid like doing this really important part of being in service. Like, I think it's time for me to be done. Like I felt myself like doing this mental math that like just wasn't going to work. So it's like, okay, I think that's it. Like, I think we're done. So that was the biggest part, obviously, was my kids, but there were other parts there too. I think professionally, I also just felt like I was ready to move on and do something else. But definitely when you feel yourself working yourself out of a job in your own brain, it's probably time to go figure something else out. So.
Well, that's a great word of wisdom. And I'm learning everything about you now. So this is exciting.
Yeah, we've never talked about some of this stuff. Yeah, I was pregnant with John, and I was like doing math in my brain about how I like get out of deployments, and I was like, wait a sec, what are you doing? Like, this isn't going to work. Like, it's time to go. It was a hard call to make, actually.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, because you transitioned from military then to corporate America. And I think if I remember in your bio that I just read, it was Facebook, it was Data Robot, then you went into startup land. So you've kind of had a career in like the most traditional of traditional environments, to the corporate of corporate environments, to the non-corporate of corporate environments that you could possibly imagine, in which we both were in. So tell me a little bit about, I think, that those transitions.
Yeah, I went from the Marine Corps to Facebook, which was an interesting transition, which I actually loved. That was I went from the Marine Corps to Facebook, and this was in 2019. Early 2019 is when I made that transition. I took like a few months off and then started at Facebook. And I don't think I knew what to, I mean, I had no idea what to expect. I knew what to expect as much as I knew what to expect out of joining the Marine Corps, which is absolutely nothing because I never worked at Facebook either. I had the help of some tremendously wonderful people at an organization called Breakline that helps veterans transition into roles in tech. And so to some degree, they gave me some help in understanding what to expect. But I don't think when you've spent that much time in one organization and then you pivot into something completely different, you're still going to be caught off guard in some unexpected ways. So I go from like the military to someone preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for me literally every single day. So it's a little different. But I think one of the things that caught me off guard that is surprisingly, there are actually pretty decent boundaries around work and work and work-life boundaries when you're in military service, especially in the role that I was in. So I was an intelligence officer, which means very literally like my work has to stay in the office. Otherwise, I'm probably committing like a security infraction. And so when I was done for the day, my stuff gets locked up. It's in my office. It's not coming home. It can't come home usually. And it actually doesn't get talked about at home very much either because it's just the way it is. And all of a sudden I go from that to like, my work is literally downloaded on my phone. Like everybody's got my app downloaded on their phone and everybody's asking about Facebook or talking about it. And I've got this work laptop that goes home and office and back and forth. And so and then my team was partly in Singapore and Dublin and everywhere. And so my phone was buzzing throughout the night too, because I didn't know how to turn the notifications off because I was an idiot. So I think like moving from like the strictest of boundaries to ones where like they just didn't exist unless you knew how to set them for yourself, which I'd never really put that into practice because this is somebody in their like early 30s who's worked in corporate America for the first time. Like I just was caught off guard completely. And you worked with me at Trivetta. It's only been within the last like couple of years that I've actually learned to set my own boundaries at work. It took that long for me to like calibrate myself. Make like that transition didn't happen naturally for me because I never learned it over time. It was done for me because of the job that I had. And now I've had to do it for myself. And it was hard. That was probably the hardest part of making that change is I had to learn to establish that on my own as opposed to it like being put into practice over time, like everybody else, had figured out before me. I never learned it. So I don't know if that was like the most direct answer to your question, but I think that that's like been one of the more challenging things.
No, I think that's a great answer because it's something that they don't necessarily teach you in school, right?
No,
They don't teach
not
you
at all.
that. They might teach you, how to leverage collaboration or cooperation or stuff like that. In which case, yes, okay, you're doing that in both environments, but I mean, the work-life balance and having very strict confines around, I'm going to work here or I'm going to shift my hours there. That's something that is not taught. It's a learned experience.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's something that like it is something that I think only now I'm starting to understand. I don't think I appreciated the importance of it. It's only something that you start to understand the more that like it erodes and it starts to erode your mental health. And that's just it's not sustainable over time. Um, and it's something that I only appreciated whenever it's like whenever I had to do it for myself because like for the longest time I didn't have to and that worked just fine when I didn't have to do it for myself and it was done institutionally for me, but it wasn't working for a long time and it was a really tough transition to make.
So then when you think about the transition from, someone who made you, I think you said breakfast, lunch, and dinner literally, to, you know, data robot slash Truveta, like
Yeah,
talk about that because I think that's another huge pivot.
huge pivot. Yeah, especially going from yeah, you go from a like Facebook is notorious for I don't think they do this anymore. I think this is one of the post-COVID cutbacks, but they used to do your laundry for you for free. I know they had a lot of like benefits. I think some of them are still there. I know the free meals are still there. Shuttle you to work. They are notorious for their benefits. You know, um, going from that to a much smaller startup, I think um, there's there's a lot of great that comes with like a lot like the way that I tend to think about it. I'll say I won't bury the lead, and the lead that I won't bury is I find a lot of joy in working with a much smaller team and a much smaller company. And one of the reasons that I'm really happy in the place that I'm in is because I work with a really small group of people and it's extremely high trust and we all know each other really well and we know how we work. And I mean, we move really, really fast to solve problems. And I really, really like this work mode. Well, there's no politics involved. There's not 50 review gates to get something, to ship a product or to ship a feature. And that feels really, really good to me. And I'm not claiming that it's always like that in a big company, but there is a relationship between like size and the amount of like review or sort of ceremony that goes into like moving as a product team. And understandably so. The bigger you get, the more risk there can be associated with shipping new features and changing your product. And it's understandable sometimes some of those layers start to come into play. We're still really, really small and we're really early. And there's a lot of fun in 0 to 1 product work. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So yeah, I moved from this like large company to a smaller company like a Truveta or to Data Robot or to where I'm at now. You lose a lot of the benefits. I would say the rewards are worth it. And some of the rewards are that you can move really, really quickly. If something needs to get done, you can kind of pick it up and do it. Generally speaking, where I'm at right now, they don't do my laundry for me. And nobody's making me breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But super high trust team, and we all know each other really well. We've all worked together before at prior companies, so we know each other well. We know how we each work, and we can generally ship features pretty quickly because we each know how each other communicates, and there's not like a tremendous amount of politicking to be done to get something to work. We just work really, really well together, and we gel well together. So there's just some of the trade-offs that are not obvious. When you have a really small group of people, if you click well together, it can work really, really well. They won't do your laundry for you.
Well, yeah, that's mine's more of like the ironing. I can't do the ironing. Throwing
I
things in
love
the
to
washer.
iron. Are you kidding me?
You either love it or you hate it, is my
I love
experience.
it. I love to iron. I think that's the military thing though. Like there's like something really gratifying to me about like, just like a really well pressed. I'll iron for anyone. It's like a love language for me. I love to iron.
Okay, well, I'll be shipping you all my ironing.
Okay, that's fine. I can't guarantee how it's going to come back, but like you can ship me your ironing if you want. I love to iron.
As long as it's all nice and folded and in a box, I'm sure it'll be all nice and fine. Um, no, but I think what I love the most from this conversation is that something that they don't necessarily teach you in school is that your personality and what drives you as a person can map to the
Yes.
environment by which you find yourself in. If
Yeah.
you're a really, and I'm going to go out on a branch here, if you're a real a strict person who needs that strict environment in order
Yes.
to really succeed, then maybe a professional career in the military is for you. If you like that big environment in which your confines are very, very small, but you know that, okay, my autonomy is small and the amount of sign off that I need to do in order to ship a feature is, pretty massive. And I'm okay with that because I just work in my little area. Cool.
Let me tell you something too, and because you bring up a really good point. Is like I would not have where I'm at right now. I would not have thrived in this environment out the gate. Like I would. This is not the place for me 7 years ago, for example. Like this is the place for me today. It's not where I should have been, in 2019 or in 20. This is the right place for me now. This is the right size of a company for me now. If this company grows tremendously, it's probably still the right. Like I think it's all about like size and stage is not something that's like a static need for someone. Like my life is going to change, and the as my life changes, my needs and the company that I work for are going to change as well. And you gotta kinda jive with that a little bit. You're totally right. Facebook I didn't leave Facebook because I was unhappy with Facebook. I left Facebook because I had an opportunity elsewhere that was really hard to pass up, but I actually really loved my time there. I was there for 2.5 years, and I absolutely loved it. I had a great time there, and I learned a ton there too. That's one of the other benefits of, like, a large company like that. You get so much exposure to so many different kinds of work and different styles of work and ways to work. It was a phenomenal opportunity. You're totally right. Like there's it's not this is not a uniform thing where it's like I'm Kayla and this is not changing and I always work this way and like therefore all companies that I work for have to look this way. It's like I work this way today and this is what's working for me now and so this is where I'm at. But like my needs will change, my company's needs will change and like you have to kind of ebb and flow with that. You're totally spot on. That's a really good point.
And your risk aversion too, because not everyone is for, a startup environment in which you have a high risk.
Totally great.
401k matching is not necessarily a thing sometimes in startups. And so if you can't afford it, then literally, then that's fine. There's lots of different ways and what I try to do in instilling in a lot of the people that I speak to and the students that I speak to is you need to know yourself. As you exactly said, at that point in time. I know that I enjoy a startup environment that's a little bit bigger than seed, but I love startups because I have more autonomy to go and just get the stuff done.
Yeah.
And then I can go directly to marketing. I can go directly to, engineering. And I don't have to go through different gatekeepers. Whereas that is not the case from really large employers per se.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. I mean, I think where I've ended up of late is questions like that. I think a lot about like the ways that companies work and how people have to move or how people move to achieve what they need to achieve. And then I think a lot about benefits. I'm in the same boat where like I want to know if the healthcare is good. And I think those are really valid questions to sort through too. Like, are they 401k matching? Like, because there are some startups like my own, for example, right now, has invested, like, they prioritize good healthcare, um, in some cases over other kinds of benefits. But like, there's, definitely valid questions to be asked about what kinds of benefits some startups are prioritizing over other. Like, there's all kinds of ways that you can slice and dice what you're prioritizing and how you're prioritizing it, ways of working, the kinds of benefits you think are most important depending on what you or your family needs. It's That's spot on. It's a really good way to it's a good way to approach it.
Yeah, and it's not just necessarily stuck on, what your academic career is either. And I think that that's definitely two key themes that, can have leverageable skills that are academically inclined, but then you have learned experiences and lived experiences then that you
Mhm.
can leverage, pivoting and evolving your career. But then the other piece is that it's not just the name cachet,
Yeah,
right? Of the organization. It takes a lot more to feel fulfilled on a daily basis.
yeah, you're totally right. That's totally right.
So we're nearing our time and I want to be cognizant of that. But I guess my last question for you is, if you were to speak to Kayla 15 years ago,
Oh
what
man,
words of wisdom would you have imparted on her?
buckle up. Um, that is a good question. That's a really great question. Kayla 15 years ago. Um, I think someone gave me this advice then, and I wish that I wish I'd understood it better, I think is probably, and they gave me some advice along the lines of this is gonna be too long-winded. I'm gonna try and be quick. Um, my very first job in the military was not an intelligence job. For like 4 or 5 months, I had to backfill somebody in this random like logistics job, and I was not overly excited about it because I did all this like intel school and I thought it was gonna be super cool, and then I ended up having to do a job that was not advertised as the one I was supposed to be doing, and it seemed uncool to me. Um, and the advice that I got from the person who was talking to me about it said something like, if people who learn broad, people who like learn a lot of things about all these different functional areas end up being really dangerous. And I didn't understand, like, I was like so peeved because I was like 22 years old or something like that. And I was like, yeah, but I want to be cool. Um, and I wish that I understood him better at the time, because the advice that I would give myself 15 years ago would be like, pay attention. Like, you're learning so much, like, and all of these like micro experiences that don't seem super relevant all the time are really relevant. Like, they don't seem like it always, but this 4 or 5 month stint in logistics ended up being one of the most like valuable. First of all, like, logistics is extremely important in the military and just in general. Like, it's super related to ops across the board, and I still like harken on that experience to this day. And also, like, yeah, just pay attention. Like, we're learning and experiencing things all the time that are actually probably pretty relevant and valuable. And I think I just would have given myself the advice to not forget to soak it in every once in a while. Um, Even if it doesn't always feel like, the super sexy cool thing that you went to school for, that I went to school for or whatever. There's some good lessons out there. And usually they're the offbeat, like, lived experience lessons that you didn't expect much out of, but those are usually the ones that I end up using the most. So that's what I would have told my 22, 23-year-old self when I was brooding over something that I thought was uncool, that I learned way more from than any like first intelligence job that I ever did. Like, the first intel jobs weren't even that helpful or cool. It was that like first stint that I was so peeved over. And he was right. It ended up making me a way better officer than any other thing I did in the beginning. So yeah.
Words to live by. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. It was helpful. I should probably text him or something and remind him that he said that, and that was super helpful advice. I don't think I've ever
Yeah,
done that.
you should. You should. All right. And with that, our time has come to an end. So, Kayla, we thank you so much for your participation as well as your honesty, I think, in this conversation.
Thank
We've
you.
learned
This
so
was
much.
fun chatting with you.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Bye. At STEMFROM, we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEMFROM, we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, and even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today. And don't ever forget to ask yourselves, where do you want your journey to stem from? Bye, everyone.